this is a long overdue Canon EOS R7 review. So let's get into it. So I got this camera in like mid to late December of 2022, and I've had it about 4 months now. So it's April and I've used this camera a lot. And I'm gonna break down my review into a few different categories. First, what I like about it. Second, what I don't like about it. And then just overall my experience with the camera. And so starting with what I like about it, let's talk about the functionality of this camera. And within that category, I also have like subcategories. So within its functionality, I love that it has two SD card slots. Now, I know this is pretty standard for a lot of people today, but coming from the EOS R, I didn't have that option. I only had one SD card slot. And so having two, you have the option to record a backup to another SD card. And so now you're able to, pretty much duplicate your footage in case something happens to the footage on one SD card, in case it corrupts or anything like that, or it gets damaged. You have an immediate backup, which is really helpful. You can also do relay recording, which is basically when if I'm filming something and one SD card fills up, it'll immediately start recording to the next one. That's extremely helpful for me as well. And so that has been, a great benefit for me. There's also the in-body image stabilization. Now, this has been really huge for me because I shoot a lot of footage handheld. I honestly don't use a stabilizer, a gimbal, unless it's something that's going to require an extreme amount of motion. And so really being able to record B-roll handheld and record footage handheld and not have to worry about a lot of shakiness in the footage has been really helpful for me. The Canon EOS R, that has digital image stabilization, but it's not nearly as good as actual physical in-body image stabilization. And so that's been really helpful for me. Next is the battery life. This camera has surprisingly good battery life considering, the high quality features that it offers. And so that's been a huge benefit for me as well. And I would say lastly, there is also the no 30-minute record limit. Again, I know that is, that's pretty typical on a lot of cameras today, but coming from the previous camera I had, it had a 30-minute record limit. And so being able to go over that has been hugely beneficial for me. And there's also the customization of the buttons. You can customize pretty much every button on this camera. And so that's also been, just a huge benefit for me. Yes, I could do that on my EOS R, but not to the degree that I can with the R7. And so those are all things I consider under the umbrella of the functionality of it. Now onto the actual image quality. The image quality on this camera has been really great. So you can do 4K 24, 4K 30, 4K 60, or you can do full HD at 120 frames per second. You also have something that's called 4K fine mode. And what 4K fine mode is basically a higher detailed format for 4K. See, it's 4K footage, but it is 4K footage that's been downsampled from a 7K sensor. And so it's going to be more detailed and it's going to have a sharper look than just the standard 4K that this camera offers. So you have the option to shoot in that mode, which really helps a lot. Also, this camera can do 10-bit. And so I used to the EOS R 8-bit, so I'm able to color grade my footage to a higher degree on the R7 than I would have been on the EOS R. So that's been really helpful as well. It also does C-Log 3, which is an even flatter color profile than C-Log. So once again, I'm getting more range in terms of how I can color grade some footage. So yeah, so that's pretty much it in terms of things that I like about this camera. It's been great. Moving on to what I didn't like about it. Okay, so what I don't like about it, but it's honestly not even a huge issue anymore, the build quality. Holding my EOS R, which is like 5 years old at this point, and holding this camera just felt like, the materials felt kind of cheap. Like the plastic didn't feel as thick and as dense, Now, to be fair, it is like a APS-C camera, so smaller sensor. They probably needed less for the camera body in general, but yeah, I wish it just had a little more like weight to it, robustness to it. I feel like it's yeah. Now I also want to say that I've had no issues in terms of like functionality or reliability with this camera. Every button works as it's supposed to, but just holding the camera, it took me a minute to get adjusted to it. So initially, that actually was like a challenge for me. It's like this doesn't feel right. But I actually got adjusted to it. I also have a cage on it now, so I've also adjusted to that as well. So yeah. Yeah, not a huge issue. It's kind of just an adjustment for me personally. And so yeah, I would say the biggest what I learned about this camera has been huge. So I'm used to color grading like C-Log, 'cause like I said, EOS R, that's what I shot with, for a year. I still have it, but I'm used to color grading on that and shooting on that, and I know how to expose and color grade that. This camera is a little different. So because I shoot in log, with this camera specifically, you can't be as like free as you want to in terms of the ISO. So on the EOS R, I usually have my ISO 800, but if I have to boost it to 2000, it's not going to be a huge issue when I'm editing. You won't see a ton of noise. But with the EOS R7, if I bump my ISO from 800 to 2000, you're going to see a massive amount of noise. And I was feeling like kind of frustrated when I, started boosting my ISO at first, because I was like, man, like people were saying this camera is good in low light and it's better than even other cameras like in low light. Like it's a pretty good low light, camera. And so I was surprised at that. But here's the thing. The whole thing was because I was using C-Log 3. C-Log 3 is a flatter color profile than C-Log. And so there's going to be more noise when you're shooting in C-Log 3 versus C-Log because it's a flatter color profile. So that's even something the camera tells you. Like literally, it's not like a mistake or anything they made. It's just what's going to happen when you're shooting in an even flatter color profile. If I go to turn C-Log off, it has a little warning that just says, hey, more noise will be, seen at higher ISO levels. And so that's just something I had to learn how to like expose it properly and not be so like, freely bumping my ISO from 800 to 2000 because, with this different color profile, I have to expose it differently and I have to color grade it differently. And that's another thing. When it comes to color grading C-Log 3, it has been a challenge for me just because whatever I was doing with C-Log, when I just bring down the shadows, boost the highlights, add a little bit of saturation to the midtones, that's pretty much all I was doing. And everything would come out and look really well on a 8-bit camera with C-Log. But with this 10-bit camera with C-Log 3, it's like, okay, bring down the shadows, bring up the highlights, and don't just add a little bit of saturation, add a lot of saturation. Like add saturation to the whole image and add saturation to your midtones. And so it was just like really having to, put a lot more effort into color grading this footage than with the EOS R. So that was a challenge for me, but it was a learning curve. But again, like this is nothing that's wrong with like the camera itself. This has been stuff that I've had to learn. And so it's really just become apparent to me that like cameras are great, but the most valuable like investment you'll make is into like how to actually use what you have. Because even if I like got a red camera today, if I didn't know how to use it properly, then I'm positive I could produce better footage on the EOS R, which is like $1,500 or $1,600, than I could on, a $6,000 cinema camera. So yeah, I think it's just really significant that whoever you are, if you're going to get a camera, invest in your education, learn how to use the camera properly, because when I tell you with the EOS R, when I got that in January of 2022, the stuff I shot was cool, it was okay. But the stuff that I was shooting later in the year was way better. And it was way better, but not because the camera changed, but because my knowledge got better on how to use it, how to color grade it, how to expose it, how to do those things with it. And so, yeah, the most valuable thing that you have like is your knowledge and your skills. The camera is kind of like it's a bonus. It's a tool, but it'll only carry you as far as your actual knowledge will. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Overall, would I recommend the Canon EOS R7? Yes, I would. It is a fantastic camera for everyone. If you're a photographer, it's a great camera. If you're a videographer, it's a great camera. If you're just a general hybrid shooter, it's a great camera. And at the price tag of like $1,500, it's a really great deal for all the features that it offers you. So yeah, I highly recommend it. And yeah, if you do want to invest in your education and your knowledge, you can pick up my e-course called Film Foundations. It is only $45, and it's really just going over the basics of creating videos, just teaching you how to, understand exposure and composition and framing and, recording audio, editing, just helping you to understand the basics. But yeah, I'd highly recommend this camera. And one more thing that I also love about this camera is the autofocus. The autofocus is really, really sticky. And it's crazy how like sticky that it is. Like it'll catch on to a subject and it won't let go, And so it's really phenomenal in that aspect. I remember, I think this might have been like a few weeks ago or something, but I was using my R7 and then I was like, oh, let me use my EOS R for something. I forgot what it was. And when I tell you that this autofocus just seemed like it didn't work at all, I was like, what is wrong with this thing? It is not performing, but it's the same autofocus. But the fact that I've been on the R7 for, months now and going back to use my other camera, it really highlighted to me how, wow, like, this autofocus is, leaps and bounds beyond what the EOS R is. So yeah, that is my review. Thank you for watching. Feel free to come back.